non-clean room environments without training, shouldn't be opening them. At least if you have any ambition to get the data back.
Worst thing you can do is just dive into the problem. You have to take precautions to make sure you're not going to be furthering the problem.
All about understanding when to stop, and if you're not comfortable with certain techniques or don't know certain techniques, if that customer is going to be seeking professional data recovery at some point and willing to pay the money for that, you should be very careful about what you do, because it could hurt our chances down the road of actually being successful in the recovery.
We have communication with sometimes end users, and we have to give them the bad news that we're not going to be able to recover your data. And a lot of times it's because a third party has done something silly, like thrown original parts in the trash, or opened up the hard drive and completely misaligned the platters and scratched them up, or got significant amounts of fingerprints or dust all over the platters. And probably about once a month we'll actually have somebody send us hard drive platters in a bag and say, help. That's kind of always an amusing one. Sometimes it's a computer repair guy who's done that, but more common than that, it's at a computer repair store or facility where a new employee just wasn't properly trained with what the business owner's expectations.
Maybe 15, 20 years ago, that type of technique would have actually gotten you somewhere, but unfortunately on the modern devices, these things usually just lead to more harm than good.
In fact, even some of the biggest computer chains in the world, I won't mention any by name, but we've had cases come in the door here from, multi-billion-dollar companies where some new kid who's been at the store for 3 weeks just joins the computer repair department, and all of a sudden the service manager looks over and this kid's got the cover off of a hard drive and got his hands up. Believe it or not, that person's trying to help that consumer.
Right.
He's not actually trying to be malicious or mean-spirited, or he's actually trying to help. He's like, this thing is broke. Let me see if I can open it up and jimmy it. And they don't realize that this is an extraordinarily delicate piece of equipment that's built in a Class 100 clean room that is machined to nanometers. The magnetic, the distance between the read head and the platter on some of these modern drives is measured in nanometers. It's literally hydrogen atoms. That's the distance. That's called the fly height.
Historical techniques that may or may not have worked in the past, but on modern hard drives absolutely will not work. And a lot of it has to do with what Brian just mentioned. You hear techniques of putting them in freezers, and in particular, putting it in a freezer is fairly detrimental to a drive because of that fly height Brian was talking about being so low. Whenever you have a drive in a freezer, it gets very cold, and at some point you take it out, it warms up, and you get condensation on the platter, and what then happens is the head drags through that water and can actually do a fairly significant amount of damage to the platter at that point. In particular with control boards, we see it pretty often. We don't get their original control board in, so again, kind of going back to what we were talking about modern hard drives, the control boards are absolutely unique to the hard drive.
Very, very common misdiagnosis. Whereas we'll think, oh, well, my hard drive's not working, I should swap the printed circuitry. If the drive is spinning, printed circuitry is probably just fine. Our hard drive has a lot of in-the-factory specific calibrations that are going to prevent just a board swap. And more than that, 90% of the power that runs a hard drive is to spin that three-phase spindle motor. And when the printed circuitry is smoked or damaged, the most common symptom is the drive will not spin. So if your drive is spinning, leave the board alone. It is a good rule of thumb.
That's a technique that you are going to try, changing control boards. Label them so that you know which one the original is and which one was the donor, and that way if you do need to send it into a data recovery lab for subsequent work, you can make sure you send the original board, because that's a very, very common thing that we see. We get a drive in here, we know fairly quickly it's a mismatch in the control board, because we can tell that, and we'll call up the computer shop and say, oh, do you have the original control board? And they'll say, they'll end up sending us 10 of them, you know, so, or not have it at all. So it is really important to make sure to keep track of.
I was going to say you brought up a good point by labeling things in general. I mean, several times a week we get a drive in and go through the recovery process. The broken drive gets fixed, we extract the data. The guy's like, that's not my data. Sent in the wrong client's drive. So at a minimum, label your client's drives with a some sort of cataloging system that you can very explicitly identify whose drive is whose. Because it's an incredibly common problem that we get the wrong drive.
At the very least, get some stickers and put Joe Smith on there and his phone number so that, you know, we can always keep track of whose stuff is whose, because that's a very common problem that we see that is often can lead to some extremely upset consumers.